Hello everyone. This is going to be the third video in the series for discrimination rights, and it's going to cover the LGBTQ discrimination as well as the rights and the laws. And then the end part of it, I will have the question and the answers to a few of the most popular questions that's always asked for this topic. So, more than 5.5 million LGBTQ individuals living in the United States has importance to recognize not only our progress in furthering equality efforts, but also the barriers LGBTQ people still face in fair and equal access to employment, housing, healthcare, and public accommodations. According to the Center for American Progress, as many as 1 in 4 LGBTQ individuals in the U.S. reported experiencing some form of discrimination. While there exist a number of non-discrimination laws in the federal, state, and local levels that protect people from discrimination on the basis of characteristics such as age, sex, or national origin, until recently, federal law did not protect individuals from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. That changed in June 2020. With the Supreme Court's landmark ruling in Bostock versus Clayton County, where the court ruled that the provision of Title VII of the Civil Acts Right in 1964 that protects employees from sex discrimination also extends to the protections of employees based on their gender identity and sexual orientation. However, it is important to note that this ruling only prohibits such discrimination in the employment context. It does not offer protections under this law to such individuals in any other area such as housing. So, what is discrimination? As we've covered in the other two videos, the legal definition of discrimination is the unequal treatment of persons on the basis of an identifying characteristic. Discrimination can refer to any sort of act or behavior that distinguishes or singles out individuals on account of factors such as age, sex, race, national origin, sexual orientation, and gender identity. This can include revoking or extending preferential treatment. The primary forms of discrimination discussed in reference to the LGBTQ population are those based on sexual orientation and gender identity. However, LGBTQ individuals can also face discrimination as a result of other identifiers, such as the color of their skin, national origin, or even abilities. Types of discrimination. Discrimination can come in many forms and occur in a variety of settings. From the workplace to your doctor's office to the store you frequent for groceries, any setting that involves contact with another person can become a site of discrimination. Types of discrimination include age, race, sex, national origin, disability, including mental and physical, marital status, religious belief or activity, gender identity, sexual orientation, or pregnancy status. Examples of overt discrimination may be denying equal pay, denying goods and services, refusing housing, harassment, failing to accommodate individuals with disabilities or specific religious needs. How discrimination affects LGBTQ individuals. Experiencing discrimination is not something that can or should be easily brushed off. despite the reality that many people often feel they must brush off discrimination in order to maintain peace. Yet, supporting or promoting discriminatory acts has real consequences on the lives of those affected. The impact of discrimination in the LGBTQ community may include effects on physical health, mental and psychological health, education, employment, housing status, treatment in public and social settings, economic security. Some data on the health and livelihood of LGBTQ individuals in the U.S. shows that 46% of LGBTQ workers are closeted in the workplace. 23% of transgender individuals have reported experiencing catastrophic discrimination, which is defined as 3 or more life-disrupting events. LGBTQ immigrants face unique barriers in gaining access to adequate health care and legal protections against federal and employment discrimination. 1 in 5 survivors of anti-LGBTQ violence in the U.S. are undocumented LGBTQ immigrants. 68.5% of LGBTQ respondents in a survey who had experienced discrimination reported a negative impact on their psychological well-being. 56.6% of LGBTQ respondents from a survey reported a negative impact on their neighborhood and community environment. The effects of discrimination can be even more significant among LGBTQ individuals who are marginalized in other ways. For instance, LGBTQ people of color are 19% more likely than white LGBTQ individuals to face discrimination when applying for a job in the U.S. Transgender and non-binary people of color report higher rates of suicide thoughts and behaviors and are more likely to experience violence, poverty, and incarceration than their white counterparts. Being a woman, identifying as non-binary, or being transgender also carries a higher chance of facing discrimination among those in the LGBTQ community. Other factors that can contribute to the prevalence and types of discrimination faced by LGBTQ individuals includes a person's age, national origin, religion, disability status, and more. LGBTQ workplace discrimination. 75 countries across the globe, including the United States, as of June 2020, prohibit employment discrimination on account of sexual orientation. In addition to the recently provided federal protections, a number of states, territories, counties, and municipalities have passed their own anti-discrimination laws. Some of them, such as Florida, are expressly intended to mirror federal laws providing for the same protections. So until the Supreme Court issued its ruling in Bostock, gender identity and sexual orientation discrimination in the state of Florida were not prohibited, but they are now. As of January 2020, 22 states and 2 U.S. territories have laws that prohibit workplace discrimination based on sexual orientation. 21 states and 2 U.S. territories prohibit workplace discrimination based on gender identity. However, discrimination can also take several other forms. Employees may be discriminated against in their wages, how they are treated by their boss and coworkers, and in hiring practices. Even more muddled are LGBTQ rights in situations of harassment in the workplace, such as offensive comments and other acts meant to make LGBTQ employees feel uncomfortable and unsafe. The legal standard that must be met in order to prove workplace harassment, also known as hostile work environment, the employee must be able to show that the offensive contact was so severe or pervasive that it materially altered the terms and conditions of the employment. It is relatively high standard that usually require more than one isolated comment. The following states and territories expressly prohibit sexual orientation and gender-based discrimination in employment: California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Washington, D.C., Florida, Guam, Hawaii, Illinois, Iowa, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Puerto Rico, Rhode Island, Utah, Vermont, and Washington. Medical care discrimination against LGBTQ individuals. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals can encounter significant barriers in receiving accessible and inclusive health care and finding medical providers that are knowledgeable about their needs. Many LGBTQ people report delaying or avoiding seeking care because they're concerned about how they may be treated by a provider. Bias and stigma in medical, employment, and other social settings can, in this way, not only have a significant mental and emotional toll, but also pose dangers to physical health and well-being. There is no federal legislation in the United States that currently protects individuals from health care discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. On the contrary, in 2017, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services began proposing regulations that would make it easier for medical providers to discriminate against LGBTQ patients, providing wider latitude to refuse care on moral or religious grounds. In May of 2017, the HHS made moves to begin rolling back federal regulations that prohibit discrimination against transgender individuals who seek care through federally funded healthcare programs. Some examples of LGBTQ healthcare discrimination include refusal of care, promotion of inappropriate treatment interventions, use of abusive language by a medical provider, discrimination from fertility and sexual health specialists. A nationally representative 2017 survey from the Center of American Progress found that 8% of LGBTQ respondents reported delaying or foregoing medical care due to concerns about discrimination. In the same survey, 8% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual respondents and 29% of transgender respondents reported experiencing a refusal of care from a medical provider because of their gender identity or sexual orientation in the past year. Members of the LGBTQ community experience higher rates of mental and physical health problems compared to the general population. Thus, these barriers faced by LGBTQ individuals in healthcare settings pose a serious concern. I will add that being part of the community is not the cause for the mental health issues for the majority of the community. The mental health issues come along with the trauma that is put on the community members. And it's nonstop. It's everywhere we go. There's some sort of discrimination, some sort of trauma, comments, whatever. That is what causes the depression or the suicidal thoughts or all these other issues that as a community we face. And we have higher numbers because of all the anti-LGBT stuff that we have to encounter daily. We're not actually depressed because we are LGBTQIA. Discrimination against LGBTQ individuals in a legal setting. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals can also face discrimination in legal settings. With a lack of federal oversight or even state-level protection in most areas of the country, there is little recourse available to LGBTQ people who face discrimination by lawyers, attorneys, and other legal professionals on account of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Legal settings, as well as many public and private settings, can become abusive spaces for LGBTQ people, with individuals living in smaller rural towns at heightened risk for mistreatment. Discrimination against LGBTQ individuals in social settings. Discrimination can occur in a variety of settings, extending beyond just a person's place of employment or their doctor's office. Social and public settings in a community can also become unsafe or unwelcoming for LGBTQ individuals depending on the attitudes and beliefs expressed by those who occupy these spaces. LGBTQ parents, children, teachers, and community workers can face exclusion and abuse from other people in their community through attempted participation in social activities, events, or education-based organizations. Examples of public and social settings where discrimination can occur: schools, playgrounds, community centers, parks, parties, bars, restaurants, libraries, transportation services. That's just to name a few. Even covert forms of discrimination, such as avoiding LGBTQ community members or failing to accommodate the needs of disabled LGBTQ community members, can have negative impacts on a person's quality of life. It's also legal in most states for businesses and other areas offering public accommodations to discriminate against LGBTQ individuals, as there is no federal law that explicitly prohibits this. Individuals living in smaller towns that contain a reduced number of available businesses and service providers can face even greater costs from these discriminatory practices. This can affect where individuals are able to or feel comfortable buying their groceries, shopping for clothes, seeking auto repair, and engaging in other forms of consumer or social activities. Laws protecting LGBTQ rights. Despite widespread concern, the reports of discrimination targeting LGBTQ individuals, the options LGBTQ people have for legal recourse in situation and discrimination are very limited. Employment and housing. Federal law prohibits discrimination based on sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation, among other things. 21 states nationwide have passed state laws that explicitly prohibit employment and housing discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. An additional state, Wisconsin, has a state law that prohibits discrimination due to sexual orientation only. Employment discrimination is also prohibited in the U.S. territories of Guam, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia. This does not extend to protections against housing discrimination in these territories. Public accommodation. Public accommodation, non-discrimination laws protect the rights of LGBT people from being refused service or discriminated against in public places on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. Non-discrimination laws prohibiting this type of discrimination have passed in 20 states and D.C. There are no laws explicitly prohibiting this type of discrimination in 27 states and 5 U.S. territories. Credit. 14 states have state laws protecting the rights of LGBTQ people from being denied credit and lending services on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. There are no such laws passed in D.C. or any of the U.S. territories. State employees. Discriminatory protections for LGBTQ state employees are provided through explicit coverage and public employment non-discrimination policies in 31 states and 3 U.S. territories. An additional 3 states and 1 U.S. territory offer these protections on the basis of sexual orientation only. Several rulings by the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, have also extended Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibition on sex discrimination to include discrimination because of gender identity and sexual orientation. These rulings do not apply to private employers. Health care. As of July 2018, 37 states do not expressly prohibit health care or health insurance discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. The state of New Jersey prohibits this type of discrimination on the basis of gender identity only. Only 19 states and D.C. prohibit the exclusion of medical services for transgender people in insurance plans. 22 states have no policy on transgender health coverage, and 10 states expressly exclude it. Certain provisions within the Affordable Care Act, or the ACA, of 2010 attempted to address some of the issues experienced by LGBTQ people in healthcare settings in the following ways. Included more health coverage options, including Medicaid expansions. Required most health insurance plans to offer the same level of coverage for behavioral and mental health issues and services as for medical and surgical services. Prohibited healthcare discrimination on the basis of sex, which includes gender identity. However, as of 2017, the last provision, Section 1557 of the ACA, has been challenged in 8 states in an attempted rollback. Rollbacks on a federal prohibition against sex discrimination in healthcare settings leave transgender individuals particularly vulnerable, as this creates further confusion and adds greater heat to the controversial, if essential, national discussion on LGBTQ rights. So what to do if you have experienced discrimination? A step-by-step guide. 1. Contact an attorney with experience in LGBTQ discrimination. If you've been discriminated against in your employment, housing search, by a doctor, or in a public space, seek the legal guidance of an experienced attorney. State, local, and company-level laws and policies on discriminating against LGBTQ people change frequently, and it can be difficult for the average person to keep track. Attorneys who work in discrimination law have a responsibility to remain up to date on these laws and other legal protections for marginalized populations such as the LGBTQ community. Speaking to an attorney about an incident of discrimination due to your gender or sexual orientation is the most effective way to learn your rights and options for legal recourse. 2. Document the incident. Collect any information you can about the discriminatory conduct. If you experienced workplace discriminations, for instance, See if you can get witness testimony from anyone else who may have witnessed the incident. Other information to document, depending on the type of discrimination and the nature of the incident, may include personal information from the individual or employer, date, time, and location of where the discrimination took place, description of the incident or reoccurring instances of discrimination, photos of any offensive material if applicable, any statements demonstrating discriminatory practices or conduct. If you experience discrimination in your place of work, it may also be helpful to locate or acquire a copy of your company's non-discrimination policies. If you experienced housing discrimination or discrimination in a medical setting, you may similarly be able to find non-discrimination policies followed by the relevant individual, landlord, or healthcare provider. Documenting the incident of discrimination and collecting this information can be important as you gather evidence to file a discrimination claim or lawsuit. 3. Report the discrimination, if applicable. If you've experienced discrimination on account of your gender or sexual orientation at your workplace, consider any grievance procedures that are available to you through your employer. You may be able to report the discriminatory conduct to a supervisor, human resources personnel, or a union representative. You can do this in writing, by email, or in person, depending on your own comfort level. Many people find that the prospect of reporting an incident of discrimination intimidating. Contacting a legal professional can give you an ally in this process, as an individual who can effectively assert your rights and represent your interests in seeking legal recourse. 4. File a discrimination lawsuit. Once you've sought legal guidance, an experienced discrimination attorney can share with you your options as far as what legal actions you can pursue based on the details of your case. Through an initial consultation, an attorney can help you determine your legal options and file a legal claim or lawsuit if that is an option you wish to pursue. LGBTQ discrimination lawsuits in the U.S. Across the nation, LGBTQ individuals face discrimination every single day in their neighborhoods, schools, workplace, and local community spaces. According to the Movement Advancement Project, MAP, 44% of the nation's LGBTQ population live in states that do not prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. Incidents of LGBTQ discrimination in the workplace can be brought to the attention of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, in order to seek legal recourse. The international organization Human Rights Watch has also urged the implementation of greater protections for LGBTQ individuals against discrimination in healthcare settings. Okay, so, knowing your rights. Can an employer discriminate against me because my sexual orientation or gender identity? Your rights. Employers with 15 or more employees are prohibited by Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act from discriminating on the basis of sex. Some courts have ruled that Title VII also bans discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. The Supreme Court recently announced that it will take up this question in 3 cases. In addition, many states and cities have laws that ban this kind of discrimination. If you believe that your rights have been violated, or you think that you have experienced discrimination at work, you can file a complaint with the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which has taken the position that LGBTQ people are protected under Title VII. Try to document everything like emails or HR papers that might be relevant. We encourage you to contact your local ACLU affiliate or the National ACLU LGBTQ and HIV project for help weighing your options. Can a landlord refuse to rent to me? Your rights. The Federal Fair Housing Act prohibits sex discrimination by most landlords, and as the Supreme Court held in 2020 with the Bostock and versus Clayton County, discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity is sex discrimination. Thus, the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. State and local laws where you live may also bar this discrimination. Housing discrimination against people with HIV/AIDS or people perceived to have HIV/AIDS is also illegal under the Fair Housing Act's protections against disability discrimination. Housing providers that receive funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD, or have loan insured by the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, as well as lenders insured by FHA are subject to HUD's Equal Access Rule, which bans discrimination in HUD programs on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. If you believe your rights have been violated, what you can do depends largely on where the discrimination took place, whether any state or local laws might apply to your situation, and where things stand under the current administration. It helps immensely if you document every interaction and exchange that could show what happened. We encourage you to contact your local ACLU affiliate or the National ACLU LGBT and HIV project to help weighing your options. Am I protected from discrimination in public accommodations like shops and restaurants? Your rights. There is no federal law that bans discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity in public accommodations like restaurants, theaters, and other businesses. However, state and local laws where you live may ban this kind of discrimination. Are LGBTQ students protected from discrimination in schools? Your rights. Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 bans discrimination on the basis of sex by public schools, and the Supreme Court held in 2020 that discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity is sex discrimination. Thus, Title IX prohibits students from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. Federal courts have held that Title IX require public schools to respond to harassment based on appearance or behavior that doesn't conform to gender stereotypes. Boys who wear makeup, girls who wear pants, or students who are transgender or non-binary. The First Amendment right to free expression can also apply to school dress codes, especially when there are different rules for boys than there are for girls. Your constitutional right to privacy makes it illegal for your school to out you to anyone without your permission, even if you're out to other people at school. The First Amendment protects your right to express yourself in public schools. This includes bringing a same-sex date to prom or any school event that talking about LGBTQ topics. Your right to be yourself in school includes the right to be transgender or non-binary and to transition at school. While the law in this area is evolving, a growing number of courts have found that Title IX and the Constitution protect transgender students' right to access sex-separated programs and facilities consistent with their gender identities. Some state and local laws also explicitly protect transgender students from discrimination in schools. If your rights are violated, document everything, taking notes to keep copies of any emails with school administrators, relevant school forms, etc. If anyone at school is harassing or threatening you, it is crucial that you report every incident to your principal or counselor. Usually, schools must be put on notice before they can be held legally responsible for protecting you. If you have reported harassment or any other kind of discrimination to your school officials and they have done little or nothing to stop it, it is encouraged that you contact your local ACLU affiliate or the National ACLU LGBTQ and HIV project and help weighing in your options. If you have been discriminated against based on sexual orientation or gender identity, the ACLU may be able to help. So make sure that you collect all the information, and you may even have to take it to the school board or, someplace higher than just the principal. Does the law protect my right to use the restroom consistent with my gender identity? Your rights. State and local laws that prohibit discrimination based on gender identity or expression should protect transgender people's rights to use restrooms and locker rooms that match their gender identity. It is believed that laws that ban sex discrimination should also be interpreted by the courts to protect transgender people. While federal law in this area is uncertain, most courts to address this question have found in favor of transgender people being able to access facilities most consistent with their gender identity. In some places, state and local non-discrimination laws are much clearer about transgender people's rights to use gender identity appropriate public restrooms. Many businesses, universities, and other public spaces are converting their restrooms to all gender spaces. How the law varies in different states and cities. Some places, for example, states like Colorado, Iowa, Oregon, and Washington, and cities like San Francisco and New York City, specifically grant transgender people the right to use gender identity appropriate restrooms in public spaces. Other places, like Chicago, continue to allow businesses to decide whether transgender patrons may access men or women's restrooms based on the gender on their ID, which may or may not reflect accurately the person's gender identity. Some cities like Austin, Texas, and New York City, Philadelphia, and West Hollywood require that single-stall restrooms be labeled as all gender. How do I update the gender marker on my U.S. passport? Your rights. As of June 30th, 2021, you no longer need to show medical documentation to establish your updated or update the gender designation on your U.S. passport. Simply fill out your passport application, typically Form DS-11, and check the male or female box that is most appropriate for you. The State Department will be adding an X designation on U.S. passports. However, it is not currently available. We expect to see the additional information from the State Department on obtaining the X designation soon. And so, all of this was for 2021 and early 2022. So it's a possibility that some places actually have that option. I know some states have the option for driver's license already, but I don't think it's in a lot of the states yet. What if I have different gender markers on different IDs or records? Your rights. There is no legal obligation to have consistent gender markers on various documents. and you should obtain the gender marker on each document that is most comfortable for you. Different gender markers on documents may cause administrative confusion if you show them at the same time, or if there is a discrepancy between the gender marker on your ID and the marker in your record. The confusion may be uncomfortable when interacting with an agent, but can usually just be cleared up with conversation. So, there's that. Hopefully this video on LGBTQ discrimination is helping somebody, because that was a lot of information. And it's always about safety first. Make sure that you are safe. And if you find yourself in a situation where you are being discriminated against, please step forward and step up and file your reports, gather your information. Don't let this continue. There is so much hate out there in the world, and if you step up for yourself, you are stepping up for thousands that come up behind you. So remember, stay safe and make reports if needed. Have a good night, everybody.